In Ross Douthat's New York Times column last Sunday, he observes that 20 years ago, the idea that the decline of organized religion would make the world more rational and less tribal seemed plausible. Today, he says it seems borderline absurd. The mood of secular liberalism nowadays, he says, is not rationalist optimism and humanist ambition, but rather existential anxiety and civilizational ennui. He writes, "The decline of religious membership and practice is increasingly seen as a social problem rather than a great leap forward. People raised without belief are looking for meaning in psychedelics, astrology, UFOs. And lately, the rise of the nones, Americans with no religious affiliation, has finally leveled off." Given this evidence, it will not surprise you that Douthat, a social conservative and practicing Catholic, suggests that the world today seems open to religion as it was open to atheism 20 years ago. The evidence he puts forward as he reviews 3 recent books, however, has little to do with religion as a system of belief or as an institution of meaning. Rather, it focuses on the quest for meaning as an individual search. When external structures of meaning fall away or fall apart, in other words, the spiritual quest can easily turn inward and become self-referential, even narcissistic. If this assessment accurately describes what's happening today, and I believe it does, this would not be the first time in our nation's history that spiritual narcissism has taken center stage. Indeed, spiritual narcissism has arguably been the through line of our nation's religious history. Our nation was founded on 3 pillars: a political theory of individual rights and civil liberties, an economic view of the beneficence of free markets, and a religious vision of souls emancipated from the bondage of original sin. This emphasis on the primacy of the individual in the political, economic, and religious realms is known as liberalism. The religious consequences of liberalism were far-reaching from the start. In 1860, Ralph Waldo Emerson put it this way: "The stern old faiths have all been pulverized. 'Tis a whole population of gentlemen and ladies out in search of religions." It soon became clear where they would find these new religions. In 1871, the historian John Weiss said in his book, American Religion, "America is an opportunity to make a religion out of the sacredness of the individual." The challenge for the individual, once emancipated from the need to seek salvation for the next life, was to find meaning and purpose in this life. The search for spiritual depth took many forms, many of them either generated or shaped by the Transcendentalists, among our predecessors as Unitarian Universalists. Ralph Waldo Emerson, for example, sought direct mystical experience of the infinite, often through the contemplation of nature. Henry David Thoreau, in his cabin on Walden Pond, sought meaning in solitude. He put it this way: "To be in company, even with the best, is soon wearisome and dissipating. I love to be alone." Walt Whitman took the opposite approach. He viewed religion as landscapes. Each has its own appeal. The goal with religion, as with landscapes, is to experience as many as possible. As Whitman put it, the goal is to know the universe itself as a road, as many roads for traveling souls. This individualist approach was sufficiently well established and sufficiently worrisome that the visiting Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville expressed his concern about it as early as the 1830s. America is a novel expression of individualism, he says. When it comes to religion, however, the new democracy seems to throw each of its citizens back forever on themselves alone and to confine them entirely within the solitude of their own hearts. Even Walt Whitman, effusive champion of the open road, foresaw dangers ahead. In Leaves of Grass, Whitman describes the state of a mind of a seeker who has been on the road too long. Downhearted doubters, dull and excluded, frivolous, sullen, moping, angry, affected, disheartened, atheistical, I know every one of you. I know the sea of torment, doubt, despair, and unbelief. Make no mistake, there's nothing wrong with the spiritual practices of contemplation, solitude, and exploration. In fact, they are much to be desired. But they are not sufficient, because none of them alone constitutes religion, which seeks to gather back together all aspects of life into a meaningful whole. The question confronting the individual seeker is whether the emancipation of our souls from the clutches of established religion leaves us restlessly exploring one new spiritual approach after another, or does it enable us somehow to find a new spiritual home? If so, what exactly would that home look like? For his part, Ross Douthat recognizes that some current spiritual options mostly require the suspension of disbelief. He says, a God of the philosophers or physicists is one thing, but a God of exorcists, miracle workers, and near-death experiences is just a bit too disreputable. Even so, he wonders, can a world that's unhappy in its unbelief be pushed back toward religious belief? He concludes by saying that contemporary disillusionment with secularism may be enough to draw people to the threshold of religion, but something more than argument is required to pull them through. I agree that disillusionment with the first fruits of secularism, existential anxiety and civilizational ennui, may be enough to draw us to the threshold of religion. I also agree that we need something more than mere argument, something more than reason and logic, to pull us into the circle of religious community. But in my view, experiences with psychedelics, astrology, exorcism, miracle workers, and near-death experiences, the focus of Douthat's column, mostly push us away from religion rather than draw us toward it. So what does pull us into the circle of religious community? For some of us, it was that moment when we realized that we need other people to help us on this journey through life. It may have been a diagnosis, a divorce, and addiction, a devastating personal failure, a crushing loss of status or capability, something that finally convinced us that we couldn't go it alone. And so we reached out for help, and we found it. For others, it may have been an experience of the sublime, a sense of awe and wonder that we are part of a wondrously amazing world. Yes, a small part, but even so, an integral part. We realize that finding our place and fulfilling our purpose meant being part of something larger than ourselves. To discover how we belong, we joined a religious community of camaraderie and commitment. In either case, what develops after we step into the circle of religious community is the realization that fulfillment comes not from agreeing to a certain set of beliefs, but rather following a certain way of life. The something more that is needed is not exotic spiritual experiences one after the other, or unreasonable religious beliefs, but rather a commitment to spiritual practice. 10 days ago, New York Times art critic Holland Cotter reviewed a new exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art titled Siena, The Rise of Painting 1300 to 1350. He points out the problem museums often have with presenting religious art. Non-Western art, from Africa, say, or Asia, can be presented as exotically spiritual, which fits in comfortably with the worldview of an increasingly secularizing public. Christian art, however, whether in painting, sculpture, or other forms, emerged because of its usefulness in the practice of the Christian faith. Most of the objects in the Siena exhibition were used by the faithful to remind themselves of their commitments, renew their resolve, and focus their attention. Cotter says, devotional objects from any culture, if taken seriously, make awkward demands on our attention, on our willingness or ability to meet them on their own terms. Put differently, the alternative to exotic experiences or unreasonable beliefs to resolve our spiritual restlessness is to take up a practice. Any spiritual practice worth taking up, as Cotter points out, will make awkward demands on our attention. It will take time and patience, and most of all, discipline. The root meaning of the word discipline, after all, is the same as the word disciple, someone who faithfully follows a path. Passing through Dublin on the way from Belfast to New York some years ago, my wife Holly Atkinson and I paid visit to an exhibition at Trinity College. My attention was drawn to a small book called The Book of Mulling. Dating from the late 8th century, it was named after the monastery in Mulling, a coastal Irish town, as well as the head of the monastery, Saint Mulling, who put the original manuscript together. The book itself contains excerpts from the 4 Christian Gospels, along with a service to use when visiting the sick and others in need. It also contains portraits of several apostles and a diagram of the monastery in Mulling. Designed for use by Irish missionary monks traveling to the continent, The Book of Mulling was a pocket guide to everything the monks needed to maintain their spiritual practice. For my part, I found myself drawn to the book not because of what it contained, but because of the unintentional double entendre of its title. To mull something is to ponder it, turn it over and over in your mind, perhaps even commit it to memory. On this more fanciful reading, the Book of Mulling is a perfect metaphor for the discipline that will enable us to move from despair to hope, from disillusionment to optimism. So if we had a Book of Mulling for our practice in dealing with life's most challenging moments, what might it contain? For those times when we're feeling overwhelmed by the fret and fever of the day, we might practice these soothing lines by Elizabeth Bishop. I am in need of music that would flow over my fretful feeling fingertips, over my bitter-tainted trembling lips with melody, deep, clear, and liquid slow. For those times when we have failed ourselves or someone we love, Mark Strand has words we can practice and make our own. And always beyond, the sea of endless transparent, of utmost calm, a place of constant beginning that has within it what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what no hand has touched, what has not arisen in the human heart. To that place, to the keeper of that place, I commit myself. For those times when we may be feeling despondent, we could practice these words by Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Joy Graham has words we can practice when we're on the edge of an experience that beckons us yet terrifies us. She writes, "Motion that forces change. This is freedom. This is the force of faith. No one gets what they want. Never again are you the same. The longing is to be pure. What you get is to be changed." You get the idea. All of us need a guide to our daily practice of faith and faithfulness. That's one reason we gather each week as a religious community. It's part of our practice. It's our practice of reminding each other what we are part of and what we are committed to. Whatever else we might practice, this one precious line by Emily Dickinson captures the spirit of our journey together. I dwell in possibility. You may recall the poem ends, "For occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise." When you find yourself discouraged and disillusioned, at a loss, alone, take up the practice of mulling and perhaps even memorizing these sources of wisdom. Make them your own because they are our own. They will remind you that your true occupation as part of this religious community is to open your arms to all that is past and all that is possible, an experience I call the experience of the divine. When hard time comes, say to yourself, I dwell in possibility, because you do. You are a child of God, and all God's children dwell in possibility. This truth is worthy of practicing everywhere and always. Amen. I love you. May God bless us all.